Michael, I appreciate you joining me. And as you know, there's a lot of interest in this franchise, Washington, and law and Dan Snyder and all that stuff. So I do want to start off with this because one of the things that we've heard a lot about is this common interest agreement and how it pertains here. So if you could kind of give us an idea, what exactly does that mean and what power, is that a common thing to sign for teams that are being investigated?
Yeah, so the common interest agreement was an agreement that the NFL and the Washington franchise agreed to as a condition of the league taking over the investigation into allegations that there was workplace misconduct. There's obviously a long list of allegations there, and it was unique in the sense that it wasn't revealed as a starting point until the last week. And it also is not necessarily a requirement for the league to take over an investigation. The league has its own authorities to take over, to investigate teams. We've seen the NBA do that with the Los Angeles Clippers, with the Phoenix Suns. So this agreement, it was obviously part of some sort of negotiation between the league and the team, that here would be the conditions for Beth Wilkinson, who the team had hired to investigate. And then, of course, we know that the league took it over after a couple of months. So as part of that change in who she was reporting to, the league and team agreed to an agreement that they wouldn't reveal stuff, which, unless both agreed, which isn't necessarily bad. It's the idea that there's sensitive information that could be damaging, not only to the team or the league, but potentially persons who haven't had an opportunity to defend themselves, or accusers that they're trying to sort of keep information in-house. Where the criticism has surfaced, I think, is that some of the accusers feel silenced through this process, and that there's a perception that the league hasn't done enough to report on what it found. Obviously, there was no report. A very different position that the league took from, say, Deflategate, where there were hundreds of pages of materials published. So, these are all criticisms, and they'll certainly not going to go away anytime soon.
Have you heard of this, like a common interest agreement, for example, in the Ray Rice case with Baltimore? Do you know if there were things like that? For other thing, is this a common agreement to enter into in this situation, in this sort of a situation?
Yeah, I don't know if there was one in Ray Rice, and it's not. I mean, the idea that there's whether it's called a common interest agreement or called something else, the idea that there's a contractual relationship that instructs how an investigation is going to go is not unusual. So
Okay.
Whatever it's called, this phrase is getting a lot of attention, but in part of that is because the lawyers involved need to know what the parameters are.
Right.
So they need to know what their duties are. So it's not uncommon to have an agreement. Whether the agreement led to this particular set of rules, I guess, remains to be seen.
And then we've obviously heard a lot there were some new allegations by Tiffany Johnson, and that came out in the roundtable hearings, and it, now the league wants to investigate that aspect of it. And the team said they want to investigate, and the league said, no, we're doing it. But I'm curious, from your perspective, when you look at this from a lawsuit situation, what kind of lawsuits could you see developing, if any, from this situation, or maybe these allegations?
Yeah, so there's a time issue with that. When the incident, as I understand, the incidents occurred some years ago, so there's going to be the issue of statute of limitations in terms of bringing a case that could have already been brought. So that's a big hurdle for any potential litigation. Now, statute of limitations can be extended or told in certain situations, but we need to know more information about what the arguments are on that front. So that's a big hurdle as a starting point. And I would also say litigation doesn't always yield more information. I mean, this is one of the hurdles with any case, is that it has to get past a motion to dismiss, and then there's pretrial discovery. But this is a lengthy process, and I think for the league's look into Dan Snyder, they're going to want answers sooner than any potential litigation process, I suspect.
So what, and from a congressional standpoint, I don't know how, I know your expert is in law, but from a congressional standpoint, are there things that you think that can come out that could further damage the situation, or if you say, if you look at what's been out there already, is that enough to maybe do more to, whether it's punishment, whether it with Dan Snyder, whether forcing to sell, whether it's suspension, whatever?
Yeah, so what Congress can do is, as I understand it, they've only made voluntary requests. They haven't issued any subpoenas.
Right.
So that is going to be a big event if they just continue to pressure by leaking. I mean, frankly, they're leaking stuff to media, right? To sort of apply pressure on both the league and the team. That's fine, and that clearly has an effect. But a more powerful way of extracting information, if they feel as if the league and the team aren't being responsive, is to start seeking subpoenas. Now, that we'll see if they do that. And I think if they're going to do it, they'd probably want to do it soon, because it's February. They're all going to have to go home to campaign soon for re-election, at least the members of the House and some senators, depending upon where they are in their 6-year term. So, there's a time issue here where if Congress is going to take action, I suspect it would be earlier than later. And we don't know if they'll go down that path. And also, subpoenas can be challenged in court. So that could kick off its own set of litigation.
Oh, great. More litigation. Great. But when you look at this case versus the Jerry Richardson case in Carolina, what similarities do you see that, again, because a lot of what fans want to know more, first and foremost, is what's going to happen to the owner? Would this force him to sell? But what similarities do you see between this and the Richardson situation in Carolina a few years ago?
Yeah, so the similarity would be workplace misconduct, mistreatment of women that are working for the team or that are around the team. And the owner is, in both cases, the owner is now directly accused. This isn't about mismanagement or being apathetic or indifferent. This is a more direct accusation. So there's similarity there. With Richardson, there was also race was part of the discussion,
Right.
as well. And there was sort of 2 layers of alleged misconduct, both in terms of mistreatment of women and making racially insensitive comments. So we haven't seen that element here. I also think there's some differences in terms of Richardson was pretty old when this came up. Snyder's younger, and I think that has an effect on how it played out. Richardson, as we understand it, was pressured to sell, but he wasn't forced to sell. And we don't know what would have happened if he had said no, and the owners had to actually vote on it. That's a different event than sort of being nudged out. And again, we don't know it's hard to get into everyone's minds, but my guess is that if Richardson had these accusations earlier in his life, maybe his reaction would have been different. I don't know. Snyder's a younger person. Snyder has not given any indication that he plans to sell the team. So without being in his head, my
Right.
guess is that he would oppose an effort to remove him. And he knows that it's tough to get 3/4 of owners to vote out another owner, particularly if people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Like, we don't know what other owners have done, right? So we don't know. We haven't seen an owner voted out. We haven't seen that in the NBA. Sterling is brought up a lot. Sterling wasn't voted out. His wife went to court and got a judge to assign the control of the family trust to her because he was declared incompetent. But we don't know if the NBA would have actually voted him out. So it's a high hurdle.
It is. And the funny thing is, like, I was talking to somebody about this earlier who knows Dan, is like, he would go scorched earth. So to bring up your point, the glass houses, he's going to go scorched earth and bring up and start throwing rocks at those houses to break that glass and expose whatever else. And I would imagine something like that could get tied up in court for a long time too.
Yeah, because there'd have to be a vote. He could argue that it's a breach of the contract, that he's owed fiduciary duties, that there's an antitrust violation. I mean, there's all these sort of potential claims that we just haven't seen before. It'd be an unprecedented case. I mean, because someone like me who writes about sports law, it'd be fascinating, but
Right.
it would be historic. And my guess is it never gets there. I think if he's punished, it would more likely be some sort. I mean, again, we don't know the allegations.
Right. We don't. Right.
True, right. So, one less what's the word? Less strong punishment would be some sort of suspension
Right.
from the team. Although, I think it's worth asking, what does that actually mean when you suspend an owner? They're not, they're not playing. They're not, they're not the coach.
Well,
Yeah.
And his wife is the co-CEO, so it's a little bit hard. But last thing, then, I appreciate your time here. The Brian Flores lawsuit too, and filed, against the NFL and 3 different teams. In general, how do you see that one unfolding and the impact of it?
Well, it could take a while to play out, and I think that part of it is that the court process is going to be slow, especially in a case like this. So his lawsuit has a couple big parts. Obviously, there's the claims. There's claims of discrimination in hiring and employment and firing. There's also his effort to have the case certified as a class. Class certification is a complicated, lengthy process where he'd have to establish that there's a viable group of people that he would represent that would have common interests. We're talking a case that could last years before there's any jury trial. And also the NFL, although the NFL and Goodell in particular has acknowledged that they have work to do, that they need to be more inclusive, and that they haven't done a good job in terms of some of the issues that Flores has raised. But that's different from saying we've broken the law, right? So they're gonna file a motion to dismiss, saying that there isn't illegal conduct, that there's maybe we need to do better, but that's different from breaking the law. There'll be a motion to dismiss filed. It will be months before there's a ruling on that. If it gets past that, there would be discovery, but the league, I would suspect, would try to settle the case before then.
And I apologize. I did have one more on the Washington situation with Goodell. I'm talking about the league taking over an investigation again. What sort of how much teeth does that really have? I guess because they are in partnership with one another. And should this be made public? And do you think they would make it public given all that has happened and the outcry because of it?
Well, you're right. I mean, they certainly have been sharply criticized for the lack of transparency, particularly when in other investigations they're more than forthcoming, right? So this is this, cherry picking when they're forthcoming. I guess it depends. Now they may say we don't have to issue a report. We're not, there's no obligation to sort of provide detail. My guess, John, is that you're right, that they'd be more likely to be transparent here, given this sharp criticism that they faced, particularly when they didn't issue a report,
right,
when the punishment came down originally. And here with an owner, maybe they would be more transparent. But it's fair to ask how tough will they be? I would say the NBA was tough on Donald Sterling, right? And every league is different, but a league can certainly be rigorous when it chooses to be. And I guess we'll see what happens here.
Michael, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And let people know where they can follow you, read your work, et cetera, because you have a lot of good insight when it comes to sports law in particular.
I appreciate that. So I write for Sportico, and I write legal stories for them, and do other interviews, social media stuff. So there's always a lot to talk about.
Yes, there is. And there's even more this offseason. So I appreciate you taking some time during a busy period. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks, John.